Hello, welcome to this next Flip Fiction video. My name's Andy and today we're looking at the passage for Easter Sunday this year, 2020. Funny Easter day for many reasons with the coronavirus things. It feels a lot less triumphant than it might normally do. But we're going to have a look at the passage because it has I think it's really good. I think the passage is really good for where we are today with Easter and coronavirus. So it's Matthew 28, 1-10. If you've got the sheet, that would be helpful because you've got you can see the same words that I'm referring to, and also I've included a bit from Good Friday, so Matthew 27 and Psalm 114 as well, because I think they're both, if we take those all together, we get a really interesting picture. So this is how Matthew describes it, and all four gospel writers describe the resurrection in a very different way. They all have the things that they emphasise. They have different things they want to pick out. And Matthew really goes for the angel part. It's quite similar to Mark's one, but in Matthew it's all about the angel. So we have Mary Magdalene and another Mary going to the tomb. And then it says, suddenly there was a great earthquake. Now, earthquakes are a sign of the end of the world. Earthquakes are a sign that a new thing is happening. And we see that again and again in Scripture. So if you have a look at Psalm 114, which is a psalm talking about the Exodus. It's always about the Exodus. It says when Israel went out from Egypt. So when Israel was released from slavery and captivity to evil. And then it talks about how nature responded. And nature, we tend to think of nature in a very sort of calming, peaceful, beautiful way, which it is. But the psalm uses nature in an enemy sense. And I've talked in these before, and you may have picked up elsewhere that the Israelites particularly regarded bodies of water as being evil. So their metaphor for evil was often water. And in here, the psalm, it talks about the sea and Jordan. But the sea looked and fled. So when Israel was rescued from Egypt, it says the sea looked and fled, the Jordan turned back. In these days of COVID-19, I hesitate to call it evil because in a way it's just a product of nature, it's a product of evolution, this virus, and it's just doing what it does. It just so happens that it impacts us in these terrible ways. But we could think, I think quite helpfully, as the coronavirus as being like the sea in the Jewish sense, this mysterious, threatening, overwhelming force in our lives that causes us stress and anxiety. That's how they saw evil, and coronavirus is very much like that for us at the moment. It's like the sea. And we've got to switch our way of thinking about the sea, from the sea being like a beautiful thing that we look at or go swimming in or sailing on. It's the Jewish understanding of the sea, as I said, was something to be frightened of, the mysterious force of evil and threat in the world. And coronavirus, I think, fits that category. And this psalm says that when Israel went out of Egypt, the sea looked and fled. It goes on to say, "Tremble, O earth, at the presence of your Lord." Tremble, O earth. This is saying that when God frees his people, evil trembles and flees. Now, this psalm was written a long time after the Exodus, and it's looking backwards to the Exodus, but it's also looking forward to the new Exodus, the new time when God will save his people once and for all and reset the world and make everything good. No sickness or disease or death. It's looking forward to those days. So the idea of the seas fleeing, the Jordan being turned back, the River Jordan being turned back, the hills skipping like lambs, tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord. These are all pictures to say that God will sort out the evil in the world. Maybe in a gentle way now, in a low-key way now, but definitely in the time to come. Let's have a look at the passages from Matthew. In Matthew 27, the preceding chapter, when Jesus cried again and breathed with a loud voice and breathed his last, it describes some of the consequences. It says the curtain of the temple was torn in two. The thing that separated people from God was torn. The earth shook, the rocks were split, the tombs were opened. And it says that the bodies of the saints were raised. This is a picture of the end times when the world will be shaken, the earth will be shaken, everything will be torn up, everything that's evil will be torn up and destroyed, and the dead will be raised to life. Now, in Matthew 28, our passage for today, there was this earthquake. They went to the tomb and they saw and felt another earthquake, and this time it was an angel who appeared to them very, very much like the angel appeared in chapter 1 when the angel announced Jesus' birth to Joseph. There are so many parallels between the two. Have a look if you have a time. So the angel appears and says to the people, as he always does, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. He's announcing the dawning of a new era. The earthquakes have symbolized that something new has happened. Now, for these people, they were the first people to see and hear that a new era had started, but the old era hadn't. It's funny, Jesus' death and resurrection started something new, but the normal form of life, the life that we all know, hasn't stopped. It carries on side by side. The two run in parallel. And we see that a little bit with the way that it talks in verse 4 about the guards. The people guarding the tomb, they also shook. They were shaken too. And it says they became like dead men. Ironically, the people guarding the dead body ended up like a dead body. But the guards didn't get it. They were shaken and they were terrified and ended up looking like dead men. But the new era had started because Jesus wasn't in the tomb anymore. Jesus was the first one raised from the dead. And the angel says, do not be afraid. You're looking for the Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He's not here because something new has started. He has been raised, as he said. Just as an interesting, important side note, Jesus didn't raise himself. The Gospels are really clear that Jesus was raised. So Jesus was completely dead and powerless. But God, outside of Jesus, the other part of the Trinity, raised him from the dead. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't Jesus raising himself. The language is really intentional. Jesus was raised. He didn't raise himself. And then the angel says, go quickly, tell his disciples. Jesus wanted to meet the disciples, it appears, only in Matthew's actually, but he wanted to meet them in Galilee. So the women were given the message to go to tell the disciples, interesting word, disciples, to meet Jesus in Galilee. And on the way, they bump into Jesus. It says, suddenly Jesus met them and said, greetings. So Jesus met these women who were going to deliver the message of his birth. There's only women in this passage actually, women and angels and Jesus. So Jesus intercepts these women taking the message to the disciples and says to them, greetings. Now, this word is a tricky one to translate. There's always a difficulty translating the Greek into English. It could be just hello. It could be that sort of simple greeting. Maybe something like good morning would be the best way. Recently I've been a bit hesitant at saying good morning to people or good afternoon when you see them in the street, because this might be a terrible morning or a terrible afternoon. But we say good morning or good afternoon kind of as a way of blessing, a way of rejoicing. And I think there's something of that going on here. Jesus said to these people, it's the Greek word is kairiti, which is linked to sort of blessing and grace and rejoicing. So it's not just hello, it was a rejoice, something new has happened. And the women there, they took hold of his feet, which is an odd detail. Apparently at the time, people thought that ghosts didn't have feet. So the fact that Jesus had feet that they could hold on to was a proof that he wasn't a ghost, he was bodily resurrected, and they worshipped him. And then to finish, we get this beautiful little detail. Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid." It said earlier that these women were filled with fear and great joy. They had a mixture of fear and great joy. Perhaps that's the appropriate way for us to be at the moment. We're fearful, but we're joyful. The two run hand in hand together, fear and joy together. But Jesus says to the women, do not be afraid. He answers their fear and says, do not be afraid, because something new has started, I think he would have added. A new era has dawned. The resurrection has come. I am the resurrection and I am here. But then he says, in a lovely little detail, he says, go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. He repeats the instruction of the angel, but he changes disciples to brothers. Now these are the people who had, in the last few days had deserted him and abandoned him. And he calls them brothers. He is gracious and welcoming and accepting to those who let him down. They haven't repented, they haven't changed their minds, but he still regards them no longer as disciples, certainly not as enemies or betrayers, but as brothers. Tell my brothers, go to Galilee, and there they will see me. So, the earthquakes in this passage, I think, are a wonderful sign that something new has happened. The old earth has been cracked and broken, and new life is pouring out through it. Today, we're in a different place. We're not quite there yet. The two worlds are running alongside. The kingdom of God and this kingdom are running in parallel. But let us never forget that alongside the fear of this world, the great joy, the love, the acceptance, the brother and sisterhood of Jesus is there too, parallel, running alongside, because Christ is risen. So I wonder what you make of this passage. It's a wonderful one, full of interesting little bits that we can hang on to with hope for these days. So do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, because Christ is risen. And in the end, he will make all things new. Amen. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll sort of join us next week, but also on the Stye services for this weekend, where we're going to worship on Good Friday and Easter Sunday and explore these passages in a bit more depth. Okay, but for now, thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.